Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm also partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training and churning out champions for years. And they offer both assessments and training in their facility as well as remote options available. And at this point in time, you've probably heard me give a little bit of that intro over a couple of episodes now, and you're probably wondering, what is the HII Method? What does it all mean? Where did it start? Where is it going? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I am, I'm just excited to share it in general because it's my own little baby. It's my own little creation. It's an original methodology that I have been shaping and developing over the years through a combination of my personal and professional experience and how everything has really just continued to move and shape and form and trend in this direction. So it's if anything, I like to say that I'm probably like the best candidate of what having a true calling is, because this is something that has been like finding its way into my life, and like I'm being met face to face with this kind of a thing over and over, and it's shaping into what is now, like I said, my little baby, the HII Method. So what is the HII Method besides this podcast being the HII Method podcast? But the HII Method itself, this original methodology that I've been shaping, developing, it is, as if you want to zoom out for a second, it's a problem-solving method. It's a creative problem-solving approach to human health, well-being, and performance. And it takes sports science principles with a heavy dose of psychology. So that way you are identifying how an individual is responding to the factors around them, the lifestyle around them, the different stressors, different environment around them. And then you can make decisions externally, what you do have control over, make decisions and change behaviors in a different way, so that way your internal environment is responding to that external environment in the way that you intend. So I know that sounds super interesting and kind of far out there, right? So to kind of break this down, I said it's a combination of my personal and professional experience that shaped this methodology. And really, I mean, there's a phrase, I want to say it's like, invention is born out of necessity, or innovation is born out of necessity. And that's kind of what drove me to develop eventually this methodology, is because I kept coming face to face with something that wasn't right. And what wasn't right that I felt was that I was being treated, just individuals in general, were being treated in a way, specifically when it comes to their health and their well-being, in a way that didn't necessarily serve them well, that they weren't necessarily responding well, but there was a lack in communication. There was a big gap in communication. There was a lack of true understanding of the individual and their experience. And there was a lack of true understanding between the individual and a practitioner or coach or parent or whatever the dynamic is. It seemed like there was a need for a different approach to it, because what has been going on maybe not the best way to continue going on. So like I said, invention or innovation is born out of necessity. So the HII Method, though, so HII stands for holistic, integrative, and innovative. So holistic meaning that all parts make up the whole. Integrative meaning that separate concepts do actually come together in unity. And innovative meaning that this is a new, novel, original idea, that this is something that is different, that it's this brand new thought, brand new, concept. So kind of this idea that we need to shift our perspective a bit on how we are identifying and taking care of ourselves and others. So again, that was just a lot of stuff that I just said. So let me give you some more specific details so that you can actually kind of paint a picture about it. Starting with, I kept saying, that is a combination of my personal and professional experience. So we're going to start with some personal experience, and we're going to go back. We're going to go way back, actually, to some of my potential family lineage here. So as the legend goes in the family, we are, within my family, that I am related to Sigmund Freud, who is the founding father of psychology. Well, one of the founding fathers of modern day psychology, but he's like the founding father of modern day psychology. And he founded the concept. He founded a number of concepts, but the main concept that he is well known for is the practice of psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis was a revolutionary, and still is a revolutionary concept, where it's engaging in dialogue with someone, in this case between a practitioner and a patient. And you're engaging in dialogue with someone in order to understand what they are saying through their own words, what they are expressing through their own words, what they're saying and how they're saying it and what they're not saying. And you start to learn, you listen to understand, and you start to learn to understand what they are experiencing through the language and the communication that they are using. So that way you as the practitioner can make a much more well-intentioned, well-informed decision of what the next best step would be based on what this individual is expressing. So it's an entire shift from what at that point in time, especially in the field of psychology, at that point in time, man, a practitioner would just observe something about you, some signs that they would observe, and they would assign a diagnosis and assign a treatment. And there was no need to hear, like you as the patient had no say, you had no voice, there was no communication whatsoever. And so that was if just the shift right there sounds revolutionary, that like a practitioner would actually engage in dialogue with a patient and trust what the patient is saying, or at least identify what the patient is saying to get an understanding of them, to then form maybe a different perspective entirely of what it is that they're experiencing. But that was not only revolutionary then, still to this day, that is a revolutionary concept, because if you can imagine the number of times that individuals are coming together and that there might be a chance for this type of a dialogue to happen, but it's not happening. Like, we're not necessarily engaging in this type of an approach, whether it is a practitioner, a patient, a coach, and an athlete, a parent and child. The communication in order to try to understand what someone is experiencing is just something that hasn't yet been identified as the necessity that it really is. But it was a revolutionary concept. So I carry that very strongly with me, that I'm like, even if, like I said, it's kind of a family legend at this point that we're related to Sigmund Freud. He's actually referred to within the family as cousin Siggy. Like, it goes that deep, right? And so hopefully we are still hopefully we are legitimately related, because that would be awesome. If not, it's okay. I'm still going to claim it. But so that part, I think, continues to drive me in a way that I didn't even realize. But going through my own, just my own life, my own personal experience. So not only that part of my family history potential, but then I'll start first as a kid. So I was a competitive figure skater as a kid. So I was an athlete as a kid, and that was my thing. That was like my entire life was being an athlete, was figure skating. That was everything to me. And I know any other athlete knows exactly what that feels like. When that is your identity, that is who you are, there is nothing else that you could ever picture yourself doing, because that's just it. Like, that's what you want to do. That's what you're built to do. That's what you're meant to do, right? And so I was a competitive figure skater as a kid, and then I hit puberty and found out the hard way that I am just not genetically built for that sport, and crushed my heart, but I ended up having to quit. And that was right around the time, I want to say I was 14 at that time when I quit, and I was also starting high school. So just the change of my lifestyle in general, I was going through a lot of stuff, going through a lot of feelings, a lot of changes in my what was a physical activity, what was an outlet for creativity, what was a hobby, what was a passion, was no longer there. And on top of that, I'm being put through a big lifestyle change, just trying to navigate what high school life is all about. And so I was going through a lot at that point in time, and we were in I want to say it was like freshman health class, and they're going through, it was like the mental health section of the health class, and in the textbook they had different disorders written with descriptions throughout the textbook. And I was reading the description for depression, and I went to my mom, like after school, I went to my parents, and I was like, this kind of sounds like what I feel like right now, like the way that I don't even remember what the description said for the depression as a disorder, but it said something about just the different feelings, different experiences of your mood that characterize being in a depressed mood, right? So I'm like, this is kind of how I feel right now, but I don't know what to think of this. Like, this kind of scares me. So my parents, being the most well-meaning parents in the world, immediately rushed me to the doctor, and they're like, something's wrong. We got to figure out what this is. Like, this, she wasn't like this before, and we don't know what's going on. So, trusting that the pediatrician who just saw me a few months ago, trusting that she would know what to do about this, what do we have to do? What do we have to know? And so she immediately, as part of her medical model protocol, she sees that I'm giving these responses of like, yeah, this is the way I feel, XYZ, whatever these moods and feelings that I have. And she goes, okay, yep. And that's definitely not, you're definitely not the same girl that I saw a couple months ago. So it seems like you have clinical depression, which is a chemical imbalance. And so we're going to start you on this antidepressant. It was an SSRI. So it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. She's like, we're going to start you on this antidepressant, and I'm going to get you set up with a psychiatrist who's going to monitor and adjust the dosage as needed. And we'll also get you set up with a therapist that you have someone to talk to. But otherwise, this is a chemical imbalance. So you're going to have to require this medication to correct it. And it's going to be something that you're going to have to take for the rest of your life, basically. So that was the assessment. That was the assessment, the diagnosis, and the treatment, all right there in one little packaged up deal. So 14 years old, mind you, 14 years old. And so I was immediately medicated. I was immediately starting to work with this psychiatrist and started to talk to this, it was a licensed therapist, but the combination of everything wasn't serving me very well. So having the medication in my system, so just to make this like the most like I guess basic description of it, it took away the feelings, if that can make sense. So there were no lows, but there were no highs either. It basically keeps you for me at least, it kept me at this just middle of the road, gray, futile feeling where there was no feelings. I didn't feel anything. There was no, like I said, there was no lows. So I didn't feel the lows, but I didn't feel the highs either. So if anything, it just makes life feel so futile. It makes you feel like you were so completely numb to everything around you that like nothing matters. And it was the most odd feeling for me. I didn't know what to think of it. And so when I would talk to the psychiatrist, I would say, I'm like, I don't feel better. I actually feel kind of worse. And she would say, okay, well, we need to up the dosage. So she would increase the dosage. And this happened probably 3 different times within about 6 months. So the dosage that I was on of this medication was tripled by the time 6 months later, which is a very rapid rate for like, especially this type of a medication in that age of a patient. That was like, that's unheard of. You don't do that. But that was what happened for me. So my dosage was rapidly increased in a short period of time. And every time I came to her, I said the same thing. I'm like, something doesn't feel like, I don't feel better. I feel worse. And her response to that was to up the dosage. So that was the pattern there. Meanwhile, trying to talk to a therapist at that time, for me, I'm like, I don't feel anything. So when a therapist, when you're working through therapy works if you work it. Like, you have to be able to identify what you're feeling and be able to articulate it, be able to work with the feelings, the emotions that you're having, because that's the only way that you can understand them and where they're coming from and then work with them, right? But because my feelings were muted, I didn't feel anything. So going to therapy and trying to talk to someone, she would ask me like, well, this and this happened at home with your mother. How does it make you feel? And I'm like, I don't really feel anything about it. Like, it made me feel so removed, so distant, so detached from everything that the process of therapy wasn't able to do anything for me. I felt so completely like everything was just missing the mark. I'm like, this isn't helping. None of this is helping. How is this possible? And so during that time, I think a lot of it, because not only being a teenager and just being rebellious in general, but because of the fact that I had an absence of feeling in general. So there was no pleasure in anything that I did, but there also was there was no fear of anything. There was you couldn't identify consequences because you didn't have a feeling of a fear either. It's like all emotion was just like gone. So I was acting and behaving in ways that I was trying to feel something regardless of whatever the consequences were, which again, like we said, that could be just because I was a rebellious teenager, but I could have been a rebellious teenager because of the fact that I had no sense of consequences. I was doing whatever I needed to feel something. And the thought or the fear of something not being good for me or being a consequence to it was like, it wasn't there. There was no there was no fear of a consequence. So it was just whatever I need to do to feel something, to get some kind of attention, something, right? So I ended up engaging in a lot of unhealthy behaviors all throughout, high school and college too. So but a lot of it was because of the fact that I just couldn't feel something. I needed to feel something, right? So this ended up kind of putting me through a lot of ups and downs, a lot of difficulty trying to navigate just how to feel about myself, how to feel about social situations, how to navigate relationships with my parents, and everything was just big up and down all throughout high school. I was in different behavioral health programs at the hospital multiple times throughout high school. I was even, ironically, I say ironically, at one point in time, I was approached by CNN to do a story. It was a success story about how teens, how there's this rising trend of mental health issues across teens that are now being identified and treated. So I was seen as a success story, ironically, I say, because I was, in this hospital program, getting the treatment for this disorder, for, this disease. And so I was, they did a little story on me. And after that, I started actually public speaking. So at this point I was 17 and I started public speaking with NAMI, with the Illinois chapter of NAMI. That's the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And I started speaking on behalf of the Illinois chapter of NAMI, traveling around to a couple of different locations where I would speak to rooms full of, get this, I would speak to rooms full of licensed therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and professionals, or those who are in school about to be professionals in the field of psychology. And so they would have me, 17 years old, stand in front of them and explain to them my experience. And there was one point in time that I actually made a comment, and this was at like a major conference. So there was like 300 doctors in the room. And I made some comment, something that was like real. I was rebellious, but, to say the least. But it was something about how this entire room of people, basically, I'm like, you're not really solving the problem. You're just creating a problem. Like I said something like that. And because I did not feel at all like what was happening within the treatment, the overall treatment, the diagnosis and treatment, I didn't feel any of it was actually relevant and working. Because I felt worse. I constantly felt worse. And I was doing whatever I had to do to try to manage. So I was very outspoken to this entire 300 doctors. I'm telling them like, you're not solving the problem. You're just creating the problem. You're part of the problem. And so I was not asked to return back to that conference to speak. So I'll say that. But if anything, I was just a product of their own doing, because here I was, a 17-year-old being medicated and not feeling anything. So not even feeling the fear of a consequence or the. So yeah. So that was their own doing, right? Don't put a 17-year-old on the stage who's afraid, who doesn't fear any consequences for their actions. They're going to do whatever they want to do. So, yeah, I don't want to keep going on that. But so at that point, so I kept feeling like there's something here that needs to be changed. I just don't know what that looks like. But I knew that I want to continue going down that route of identifying what that change would be. So I actually started studying psychology in school. So at that point, I was in college studying for my bachelor's in psychology, and I was still really struggling with my own mental health, still really struggling. I was still on the antidepressants. I could not stop them. I felt very dependent on them. If I missed a day, one day was one thing. If I missed 2 days in a row, man, it was the most erratic change in my mood, and it was scary. So I was dependent on this antidepressant as a daily thing throughout this entire time. Meanwhile, I was seeking out any possible thing to feel something. And that ended up being a lot of behaviors, a lot of behavior patterns, a lot of kind of addictive behavior patterns or like a toxic attachment to a vice. So I was drinking heavily for the sole purpose of just trying to feel something. I would drink to black out, like, as a college student, like that was my goal, was to either feel something or to escape entirely. And it was these behavior patterns and the attachments to the behavior patterns, the attachment to the feeling that I would get from the behavior. And I just kept engaging in this stuff over and over. And it wasn't just binge drinking, it was binge eating. I was eating like the massive amounts of fast food just to try to numb my feelings. And my entire health was just so different. There's no other word to say it. It was the worst that state physically and mentally that I'd ever been in, but I didn't know it at the time just how bad it was. But it was continuing to get worse and worse and worse. And it got to a point where right around my 21st birthday, I had it. I wanted absolutely nothing more to do with this life that I was living. And I didn't know what that would look like. And the feeling of fear of wanting to change, first of all, the life that you're living, because you can't imagine living it, but the fear of that change being so slow of a process that it means that you would continue to suffer with this struggle throughout this process of trying to change. It's like all you want is a very drastic, very severe change. Like, I just want to stop this and start something entirely different. It's like that feeling of like, I can't continue with this type of life. And the thought of only making small changes feels agonizing. Like, I was at that point, and that's a very dangerous point to be in when you are looking for the most drastic way to change. And you're looking for something that is going to completely put a stop on the life you're living because you can't do it anymore. That's a very dangerous place to be in when you feel like the fear of a slow progress is worse than anything else. Like, so I was at that point. Right around my 21st birthday. And for whatever reason, I feel so strongly like there was some higher purpose that was calling to me at that point in time, because I woke up the morning after my 21st birthday. So the morning after my 21st birthday, I woke up and the sun was shining in my room. And that was something that was never a thing. I always had blackout curtains. I was, had to block out the sun because I had to sleep all day so I could be out at the bars all night. I worked at the bars too. So sleeping all day, with blackout curtains. So it was rare for me to have sunshine, shining into my room. And my birthday is like right in the middle of wintertime. So it's late January. So it's right in the middle of wintertime. And so growing up, my birthday, especially growing up outside Chicago, like your birthday is always a pretty gray, cold day when you have a winter birthday in Chicago. So like I've never, ever, ever had a birthday where there was like sun shining in my room and like, so just that alone, at this point I was living in Florida. So if that helps to put this in perspective. But this was right around my birthday, like the day after my 21st birthday, the sun is shining in my room and I'm like, it's beautiful outside. I think I want to go outside. And so I made a choice that day that I was going to go outside and go for a little walk. And there was like a little hiking trail. And I was out there for probably 2 hours, and it brought like this wave of just like inspiration to me. It was like the most refreshing feeling, even though it felt physically exhausting because my health was at the worst, absolute worst. So physically walking for that long was painful, like agonizing. My lungs were like on fire. But everything about just being outside that day and finding, like I said, it's like there was a higher purpose at that point that was calling me to be outside, to get that fresh air and to have that shift of perspective in that exact moment, right? Because then from there, I immediately started focusing entirely. I'm like, what else can I do to feel that way? Because I liked the way that I felt there. I actually felt clear. I actually felt like I could think. I actually felt like I could feel. And that felt completely different than anything else that I was doing to try to feel, right? I'm like, I want more of that. So I actually continued to do that over a couple of weeks. I would go outside and I would go for a walk, and I would go, it was literally like a hiking trail that I would circle around the hiking trail however many times to get like anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. So I was all about it. I'm like, I need outside time right now because this is like heaven. I've never felt like this before. And so during that time, my body was starting to adjust, little by little, adjusting to the walking, adjusting to the terrain that I was walking on. And I was feeling more confident. And I was like, okay, I think I can actually go into a gym now and start working out. So I started going to a gym, started working out. That also kept like continually feeling better and better in my body. The more that I was moving, the more that I moved, not only did it feel that much more refreshing to move, but then I felt more confident in myself throughout the rest of the day. And I'm like, there's something here. So I kept going with that. And I got to a point where at the gym, I was working out and I was working hard. And a personal trainer comes up to me and he's like, hey, you're always like putting in so much effort here. And I feel like if we teamed up and like put some specific goals in mind, that like you could kill it. So we started working together, and he started putting me through some workouts to try to get me towards at least specific goals that we had. And he was the first person who ever explained to me at that point in time, he's like, all this work that we're doing in the gym is great, but it's only a small part of it. You also have to start focusing on what you're eating and what you're taking in. And at that point, that blew my mind. I'd never at any point considered that what I'm taking in has any effect on me. Like it just, I never thought of it. Like I would eat food because I was craving it. Like that's how I grew up. If the classic question, like, oh, what are you in the mood for? It's like, you just listen to a craving and then you go eat, right? Or if you're building putting some food on a plate, it's like, if you like a food, you just get more of that food. Like that was how I viewed food for my entire life, because that's just how it was in the house, So for him to say that, I'm like, I never even thought about that. So immediately I started just doing everything, reading everything, researching everything to get to understand this concept of like taking care of yourself through your nutrition, through your fitness, through all this stuff. During this time, I was finishing up my bachelor's in psychology. And these changes that I was making in my lifestyle outside of the classroom was making such a drastic change on my own mental health. And that just the chemistry inside of my body, I could quite honestly track and feel that I was changing in a way that I was able to identify. First of all, I was able to wean myself off of the antidepressant because I was identifying that when I would take it, I was experiencing these really adverse side effects and symptoms. So I would take that as my sign to start lowering the dose. Like, okay, my body's not responding well to this dose by these clear signs and symptoms immediately after taking it. So we're going to start lowering the dose, because otherwise I'm feeling really good and changing my chemistry. So I was doing, like, I would not recommend that anyone like experiments in that way with themselves, but I was doing this in a way where listening to my body and truly identifying and tracking everything. I tracked everything, and I was identifying when to do what when it comes to trying to wean myself off. And I successfully weaned myself off of that antidepressant. So at that point, I was a senior. I was about to graduate. And so I was 22. And so I had successfully weaned myself off of this antidepressant that I was otherwise on and dependent on since I was 14. Wow, really because of changing everything about my lifestyle and seeing how strong, how different my internal environment was. Really because I was responding, the way that I was responding to everything that I was doing was really my guiding light. It was telling me far more than I ever could have tried to force myself to do. It was like really paying attention to what's going on inside, and what it's doing is like, it was monumental. It was so monumental. And at that point in time, so again, that was my bachelor's in psychology. And continuing on in the field of psychology at that point in time, I had this one big giant question mark. I'm like, I don't know which direction to focus on, because everything that we focused on already seems very heavy into the medical model. And I've known just from my own personal experience through the field of psychology, being put through the ringer, really being put through all these different behavioral health programs, feeling very strongly like that model was not working for me, but that there's clearly something that I'm doing in this lifestyle changes that are doing far more than anything ever did throughout my teens. Like, there's got to be something here. So I decided, I was like, all right, I don't want to continue on yet with that further education in psychology. I want to first focus on nutrition and on exercise, because those are the two things that changed a lot for me. So that's what I did. So I started working on a master's in nutrition and eventually became a registered dietitian. And I also worked on a master's in exercise physiology and became a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And during that time, while going through all of that schooling, all the internships, I was also working in a few different areas over the years and a few different populations, different niches, different industries. So combination of working at one point with it was a clinical population. It was a wellness clinic, but it was a private practice wellness clinic. And so it's a combination of like looking at different health conditions that you're trying to holistically guide a treatment protocol towards, but it's all, I mean, it's private practice. And really, if anything, it just highlighted for me the business side of medicine, of healthcare in general. The fact that, you know, privatized healthcare is in itself like a major topic to talk about. So we don't have to go into that. But it opened my eyes a lot to how the business model behind what it means to have patients coming in to need to identify certain things in order for that to be billable to insurance. So that way you're still continuing to, you know, generate revenue because you got this high overhead. So I don't want to get into too much about privatized healthcare because that is its own thing, but it is a for-profit industry. And so working in that way, seeing how I knew that I wanted to work with people and help people, but then seeing that side of things changed my perspective a bit on which industry I wanted to really focus in, if that makes sense. And then, so I also worked for a bit in supplement sales and trying to understand, I'm like, okay, you know, supplements helped me a lot in different areas, but understanding from the side of the supplement industry, what it means to create and develop supplements, what it means to create the labels and the claims on the labels and everything that goes into it. And I thought, okay, that's something that, like, if I had the ability to have the oversight of what it was that I was putting out there for the world, I would take every opportunity possible to make sure that it is the most, like, absolute trustworthy possible thing. But unfortunately for me at that time, working in the industry, I wasn't yet in that kind of a position to create supplements. I was just selling them. And I thought there was a disconnect because what I wanted people to be having access to wasn't necessarily what I was being told to sell at that point, because I was just selling for, you know, a couple different companies. So that, like, shifted my mind a bit. I'm like, okay, I know what I would do and what I wouldn't do when it comes to that entire industry itself. And then also working with athletics, with sports, with just athletes in general, and with teams as well. That area probably showed me the biggest kind of eye-openers, I think, in a positive way. Because everything else that I was learning in these other industries, it kind of all came to a head when I was working within sports and within athletics. And I think some of that, well, a lot of it, I think, possibly, just personality-wise. Like, me being an athlete when I was a kid, it's like I understand the personality that other athletes or just sports-minded individuals that we all kind of have. And it's a real interesting dynamic when you are then taking all of these personalities, putting them into a team environment or into any kind of a group environment. You know, imagine like a group project with all these real strong personalities. But there were so many what felt like barriers that were restricting or restrictive for any new opinions, any new perspectives, any new insights, any potential direction for innovation. If it didn't come from some particular individual's mouth, if it was from someone else, then you were, like, pushed away. It was eye-opening because I saw that there's so much potential. There's so much potential within that industry, the sports industry, the individuals that are working in sports. There's so much potential to be able to do so much with the knowledge that they have. But because of all of these barriers and restrictions and really just outdated beliefs of who can say what and whose opinion matters and whose doesn't, it completely diminishes any potential progress for a program if they're not identifying that. But working within the sports, just within sports industry, that was when I finally came across sports science, which sounds super cool and innovative, and like it sounds like, if you can imagine, like any type of like Iron Man type of gadget thing, it's like, oh, cool, right? But so sports science is as a broad snapshot, it's leveraging technology, using technology to our advantage to understand what an individual's response, what they are responding to internally in response to their external environment, in response to the stressors that are being placed on them and how they are responding to that. And then once you identify what an individual is experiencing and how they're handling it, then you can start to make decisions on those stressors, on those controllable variables that you do have in your external environment. So that could be delegating out some sort of recommendations to their strength and conditioning. It could be having recommendations sent towards hydration and nutrition tactics, or towards overall rest and recovery and sleep. And so, but it's the entire core of it is really identifying an internal response to your external stressors, your external circumstances, and then identifying those changes to make, those different behaviors to make, different decisions to make, so that way you are having the response internally that you want to have. So for me to experience, to learn and experience the real life application of all this, I'm like, this right here, what sports science is doing for athletes is what we collectively need to be doing for health and for well-being and for overall just your general human health, well-being, and performance, right? Like it should not be kept this secret for athletes, for performance individuals, right? Not to cut out the athletes out of the equation here, but just it should not be kept a secret. This is quite literally like how everything needs to be progressing forward, how we need to be innovating, how we identify human health and well-being, and what we do about it. And everything in me was like, oh my God, this is full circle, total full circle moment, because everything in sports science being identifying that your body is communicating in some kind of a language, and we need to understand that language that it is communicating to us in so that we can identify what we're experiencing. It goes right back to what Sigmund Freud founded with psychoanalysis, the fact that there is this unique experience that everyone is having, and we have to learn the language. We have to learn how to communicate with them and learn the language that they are speaking in, and be able to identify then and understand what they are experiencing, so that then we can make decisions based on that. And that cross-section, that entire like melding of these two otherwise distinct, seemingly different fields of study completely come together in unity. So that the sports science principles being like just nice and married to the psychology, a heavy dose of psychology, and being to use the combination of both to identify how we are responding to what it is that is going on around us, so that we can adjust our decisions, we can adjust behaviors outside of us, so that we are responding internally the way that we intend to respond. I get so jazzed when I think about how everything over time unfolded in this way, because it means that, well, first of all, it gives me a sense of like, I don't know, a sense of relief maybe that I experienced all that stuff for a reason, but the fact that it continued to show up for me in order to guide me towards this kind of general, like universal understanding of where these concepts connect and why they need to connect. I feel very strongly like there was a reason for that's the higher purpose of it, that I was being put in these situations for a reason, and it's because I'm meant to do something with it that is going to help others, because I know for a fact that I'm not the only one who had those experiences with my mental health, with my physical health. And I know for a fact that that continuing on, if we do continue on with the ways that things have been going, that we're not going to see the change that we want to make, that we do have to start taking those actions now. We have to start implementing new methods, new procedures, and start shifting our perspective overall of what we want to do with what we know and what we want to learn, so that we can then change what we want to do, right? So I got very excited when I talk about the HII Method. So where the HII Method is right now, besides being a podcast, I'm also putting together, so I'm a very big, I have a heavy emphasis, a heavy appreciation for education and teaching in a way, or at least learning in a way that you can properly understand material. So I'm very education heavy. So I will be pumping out a whole bunch of different courses, as well as different books, physical and digital books, and different guides, like guidebooks that go along with the courses. So there's going to be a whole bunch of educational materials I'm going to come across over time from the HII Method perspective. But then the other goal is also implementing the HII Method, that methodology, into actual business models. So that way there is, in fact, devices, whether it's different assessment tools and devices, whether it's like a wearable device or an at-home assessment tool, if you will, different biomarker assessment tools, different methods that we can identify biomarkers or things that are going on inside that we wouldn't otherwise be able to identify. And maybe our body is telling us something in a language that we need to understand. So having those different assessment tools, different devices, different biomarker tests, so that way we can identify what's going on and have a clear point of action, have a clear identifier of what to then focus on next. So it's not only just identifying what's going on, but then you have the added piece of then this is what you would do then if you have this type of a response coming up in a wearable device or in a biomarker assessment, then you have this solution, which could be something it could be a supplement that is going to help if it's a biomarker test that needs a supplement. It could be something where it's an education based for behavior change. If there's something that maybe there are different behaviors that need to be changed over time, then it's an education and likely some journaling exercises. And there's even a potential for some neurofeedback, some at-home device with neurofeedback so that you can actually see these changes, these behavior changes that you're making are actually coming across in changing your neural pathways. So you're actually getting to identify some areas where your neuroplasticity is actually at play. Like all of these different cool working variables, but doing so in a way where, again, education heavy, so that we're truly understanding what is that's going on inside of us and what we need to do about it. And also in a way where it is applicable to real life application. So everything that I'm emphasizing with like the entire other side of the business model is very much in non-invasive, like an at-home type of a model of an assessment tool or supplement or device, whatever it is, that it's something that is easy to use, that you can use at home, that is safe to use. I'm a very, very big believer in real life application taking precedent over anything, absolutely anything and everything. And so on top of all that, on top of everything else within the HII method, then there's also research. So working with a couple of different areas of research and understanding how we can best optimize an individual's health, their physical health, their mental health, their performance overall, in this way where there is a real life application as the emphasis. Now, the reason why I say that, because that is not necessarily where research has typically focused on. We tend to place a really, really high degree of we put research on a pedestal that is the very controlled, very heavily controlled clinical trials. That's like the gold standard. It'll be called the gold standard research. If you ever heard of that, it's these clinical trials that are so heavily controlled, and even possibly it's a randomized controlled clinical trial. It might be like a blind or double blind. It's like there are these layers that we emphasize that are just greater degrees of control over the variables in a research study, and that deems it as this really well-to-do of really like the gold standard of research, right? It's like, oh, like this research you can really hang your hat on because it's this heavily controlled clinical trial, whatever it is. The thing is, and so something that I often end up having to translate when I'm working with people is that what's found in research, especially in those heavily controlled trials where every variable is controlled for, that's considered the gold standard for research, because that's the only way that they can replicate a study over and over and try to determine that the results of that study are because of their intervention and not because of some other factors at play that they weren't otherwise studying, right? So you're trying to remove the potential for other factors to play in, so that way you can identify that, yes, this thing is in fact responding to this thing that we did under this controlled condition. That is, by definition, the opposite of real life. Period. That is, by definition, the opposite of real life. So anytime that you are hearing about, or someone is telling you about a study that they saw where they found this and this and this, and they're saying, and the details of the study are going to matter when it comes to how heavily controlled it was, because of the fact that it is the exact opposite, by definition, the exact opposite of real life. Because in real life, nothing, absolutely nothing is that heavily controlled ever. In real life, you will always have those confounding variables that are at play, that are at work at all times. You will never be able to control for those. So why would you ever bank everything you have on how to take care of yourself or take care of another based on research that was found under conditions that are by definition the opposite of real life? It makes no sense, right? When you think about it in that way, it's like, well, yeah, that of course you're going to see all of these extra side effects, extra issues, extra complications in real life, because what you studied under controlled conditions is under controlled conditions. It should stay that way. That's, if you want to pump funding into research that is going to study something that doesn't apply to real life, that's fine. But then don't try to mix it in saying that it's going to be the same thing. It's not. So I know I get real fired up when I talk about this, but so for me, research for the sake of actually helping people, for the sake of actually identifying what is going on in an individual and how to best work with that, how to best optimize that, how to best take care of people and help them take care of themselves. That means we have to research real life situations. We have to research what is actually going on. And so that shift of perspective of the type of research to focus on, I think also goes hand in hand with just everything about the HII Method, that it's a completely different perspective of everything. But yeah, so I get real excited. So there's a few different legs overall to where and how the HII Method takes place and where it will take place in the coming years. So we got a few different areas that are really exciting. And I think on top of everything though, the one thing that I'm that much more excited about, I mean, I'm excited about all of it, but the one thing that I'm like that much more excited about is the fact that I'm also forming a HII Method fund that is going to not only help with the research efforts and the overall business efforts for the at-home assessments and testing, but then a portion of that is also going to be divvied up across a few different organizations, nonprofit organizations, that are specifically aimed at optimizing our external environment. Because everything about what we can do to optimize our internal environment can only take us so far if our external environment is not being taken care of as well. So I also have these different impact projects that I'm very diligent about incorporating into the overall model. So that way it's not just what we are focusing on taking in, it's also how much we are focusing on getting back and taking care of the environment around us and identifying the appropriate changes that we want to make both internally and externally in this nice, cohesive, coexisting dance, right? So I get very excited. But so some of those nonprofit organizations that I'm including right away into the HII Method fund includes the One Tree Planted, which is they plant a tree for every dollar that they receive. So you're quite literally just adding, you're helping to adjust kind of a carbon offset, if you will, kind of a carbon offset initiative. So you're hoping to add some extra or remove some carbon from the environment as you're adding to it and producing. So at least a carbon offset initiative is like the next step for us before we can get to carbon neutral. So that at least the One Tree Planted is a really cool organization. And then there's another, the Plastic Pollution Coalition. So they're actually working to remove plastic that is currently existing in the world, remove it, and find a way to repurpose it. This is a huge, huge, huge need that we need to be focusing on. Is not only removing or identifying where we're using plastics and start to change those behaviors so that way we're not doing that, but then we also have all this plastic that is existing on the earth that we need to do something with it. So this is an entire coalition working to remove it so that way we can then repurpose it in some way. And then also water.org is another organization that works to improve access to water in areas where it is otherwise not safe or not accessible, or it's not safe to access it. So all of these different initiatives so that way we can try to improve the overall environment around us, as well as working on our internal environment, because it's all cohesive. It's all this nice, pleasant dance, but that's all part of the HII Method. So I'm so excited to share with you guys. But yeah, so those are just some of the things that you can start to look out for the not only now, launching this HII Method podcast, but then in the coming future with the release and with updates and everything. So if you want to stay up to date on everything, then go ahead and click the link in the show notes so that you can subscribe to the email list so that way you are updated on all the whereabouts, all the news and everything. And then you can also, if you'd like to donate to the HII Method Fund, there's a link in there as well. So you can start to get the ball rolling on everything that we're trying to change and improve upon with the HII Method. So thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye.